And that's why we called it lock it down. Anytime you lock it down on something, you finalize your decision. You lock it in, you lock it up, and you lock it down. And you may have done that years ago, or you might not have done that at all with Christ. But you always have a new opportunity in the present moment to finalize your decision. Continue to lock it down on Christ. And so as we go through these passages, I hope that you are inspired to do just that. Today we're going to be looking at different reactions. Different reactions. Some things in life generate different reactions. For instance, if you were to wake up in the morning, it's November, it'd be a little early for this, but if you were to wake up in the morning, pull the curtains open, you were to see 2 feet of snow on the ground. Some people would be like, oh my goodness, I can't believe this. I can't go to work, I can't do this, I can't, and it would be a bad thing, right? The kids, however, would be like, woo, yes! Every year, anytime it snows, just like a skiff. And it doesn't snow a lot around here. If it's just a skiff, they'll think it's snowman. I mean, snowball fights. I mean, it's just a good thing. So either it's yay or boo. Another thing would be like, the kids ask, hey, Mom, what's for dinner? Brussels sprouts. Dad, in this home at least, would be going, yes, I love Brussels sprouts. I don't know how that happened. I didn't love them when I was a kid. Today, you saute those up. Woo! I like Brussels sprouts. But my kids, oh man, that would be bad news, right, kids? Brussels sprouts for dinner. Different reactions. Or go 49ers. Boo, right? So we got Monday Night Football tomorrow night. Go Steelers. Boo. We got the Seahawks playing the 49ers tomorrow night. If you guys want to come over, come over. It's gonna be good. So I'm all Hawks fan, right? So whether it's go Hawks, go 49ers, go Steelers, I mean, you're gonna get different reactions based upon your relationship with those things. Oh, I'm a supporter of Barack Obama. I'm a supporter of Donald Trump. Those things get very different reactions. So you're going to get different reactions based upon your relationship with those things, based upon your relationships with those people. So today we're going to consider our relationship with Jesus. And I'm going to entitle this message, Relationship Status. Sometimes you got to check the status, because Jesus can get different reactions out of you based upon your relationship with him. What is your status? What is your relationship status with Jesus? And you'll see that this passage that we're going to look at this morning, John chapter 11, gives us 3 options. Enemies, friends, or traitors. In this passage, and really in life, I think we got these 3 options to consider. What is your relationship status? And as we move through this text this morning, that's going to be the question. What is your relationship status? How do you shake out? What category of these things do you fall under? What are some of the indicators that you've moved from perhaps one category to another? Because the status of a relationship can vary with time. And we know the variable is not Christ. Right? He's a fixed point. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. That's just who he is. He does not change. He's always in pursuit of you. Right? That never changes. So that's never the variable. The variable is you and I. 2 Corinthians 13:5 says, examine yourselves. Examine yourselves to see whether you're in the faith. I'm a Christian. But these are strong words that the Bible brings out time and time again to examine yourself. Jude 1:21 says, keep yourselves in the love of God. The love of God doesn't change. Who changes? Sometimes I do. Sometimes I drift from side to side, and I need to make sure I'm examining things from time to time and then keeping myself where I ought to be. Sometimes we need to do course corrections. That's a good thing. What is your relationship status with Jesus? Sometimes we need to come back to that first love. I've grown lukewarm, but yet I'd rather have you hot or cold. I want you to be, and sometimes I need to, realize after examining myself, I need to make some corrections. So what is your relationship status? How are you conducting yourself? As an enemy of Christ? We'll look at the passage and what that means. Or as his friend? Or perhaps are we somehow betraying our Jesus? So let's look first at the first relationship status that we see in this passage. John chapter 11, verses 45 through 57 is going to show us what the enemies of Christ look like. And this is a real sad state of affairs. I think if you just flip back to John chapter 1, I've mentioned this passage before in this context, but we need to remember this really throws the whole book into a special light. Because John, the author of this book, he announces that the true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. The true light, he's here. He comes to his own people, and his people do not recognize him, do not receive him. And how sad that must have been. So, we look at this here and we realize something is really going on. If we start here in verse 45, we realize that the chief priests and the Pharisees, the very people who should have known him best, missed him. And not only missed him, but opposed him. Okay, so let's read this here. And just remember, last week, he just raised Lazarus from the dead. He produced one of his most spectacular miracles. Here's the true light, being the light of the world. And the miracle actually turned them into enemies. Let's pick it up at verse 45. It says, many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what he did, the raising of Lazarus, believed in him. Yea, but some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. So the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered the council, the Sanhedrin, and said, what are we to do? For this man performs many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. But one of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, said to them, you know nothing at all. You're a bunch of idiots, basically. Nor do you understand that it is better for you that one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish. He did not say this of his own accord, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation, and not for the nation only, but also to gather into one the children of God who are scattered abroad. So from that day on, they made plans to put Jesus to death. Verse 54, Jesus therefore no longer walked openly among the Jews. He dialed it down, And he went from there to the region near the wilderness to a town called Ephraim. And there he stayed with his disciples as a fugitive at large. Verse 55, now the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and many went up from the country to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. They were looking for Jesus and saying to one another as they stood in the temple, what do you think? Do you think that he will not come to the feast at all? You think he will make an appearance? Now the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that if anyone knew where he was, he should let them know so that they might arrest him. They locked it down on Jesus. They finalized their decision in the negative. They put a warrant out for his arrest. They opposed the work of the Messiah. They witnessed the miracle. They even acknowledged the fact that he's producing miracles. What are we going to do? Which is kind of a proof that miracles do not produce faith. Oh, I would believe if I saw God do a miracle. No, you wouldn't. Sometimes miracles do the exact opposite that you think they do. In this case, it produced the exact opposite. It produced antagonism and hostility. I find this interesting that Jesus, in his glory, when he really shows up and shows out, when he just manifests his glory, he has an interesting effect on people. He softens some and simultaneously hardens another by producing miracles and signs. So when you really encounter Jesus, when you really have an experience, he creates a fork in the road. I mean, you cannot continue on life's path if you really experience Jesus. If you really experience Jesus, you're going to have to make a decision. It's kind of like heading down Highway 84. If you were to take 84 going west, is it going to go forever? How far is it going to go? The Willamette River, right? And right at the Willamette River, you got to either go I-5 north or I-5 south. That's what it's like. Traveling the life, coming to grips with Jesus. Your life is like Highway 84, and Jesus is like the Willamette River. Once you encounter him, you have to either go north or south. If you continue on your way, you have not encountered Jesus. He will always produce a fork in the road. He will cause you to finalize a decision. When you really get a taste of who he is, you're going to like it or you're not going to like it. You're either going to go north or you're either going to go south. And in verse 47, we see a whole bunch of people who went south. Look at 47. They say, what are we supposed to do? This man performs many miracles. I mean, they acknowledge the fact. They know he's raising people from the dead. They knew who Lazarus was. And they say, if we let him go on like this, if he just goes on keeping doing all these miracles and stuff, we're going to lose our position and we're going to lose our country. And this really gets to the heart of the matter. Why do people choose to be Christ's enemy? It's because they wanted to maintain status quo. Things are comfortable as they are. We have positions of high honor. And we have a country that we have a modicum of control over. But if we let this Jesus go on what he's doing, he's going to whip the people into a frenzy. Rome is going to come in and squelch this thing, and it's going to take away our positions of privilege and honor. If, then, they start to play out the narrative. If we let Jesus do what he wants to do you know what that means? And they start to play out the script in their mind, and they don't like the result. So they try to back up the script and rewrite it. So they want to maintain control. They want to maintain control, but if we're going to let Jesus be Jesus in our life, we got to relinquish the control. They're playing control games. They're becoming his enemy. They're withstanding the work and the move of God because they like things as they are. They want to maintain control, and so we play control games, and we resist and become the enemy of God's work in our life and in the lives around us. So we can't control the script. And oh boy, do we want to. God wants to do something in our life. He wants to write something, and we take the pen out of his hand and we say, no, we can't go that way. So we can play this if and then. That's what they did here in verse 48. If we let him go on like this, if we let Jesus just be Jesus, then we lose our positions. Then perhaps we lose our country. If I share my faith, Brendan talked about this morning. If I share my faith, then I'll get rejected. If I humble myself in this relationship, then I'll get hurt. If I ask for forgiveness, then I'll look like I'm wrong. If I pray for this person, then I'll be embarrassed. If I do something out of the norm, then I'll lose control. And out of fear and probably self-protection, we'd rather things remain safe, normal, and predictable. Verse 53 says, and from that day on, they made plans to put him to death. They made plans to write him out of the script. He's doing things that makes me feel uncomfortable and even vulnerable. And so I'm going to put him to death. Take him out of the script. What's your relationship with Jesus? If you view him as a threat to your sense of control, then you're going to relate to him as your enemy. We got to relinquish the control. We got to relinquish the control. The enemies of Christ in this passage, and the enemies of Christ in life are maintainers of status quo. Am I just maintaining the status quo? In my life, in my family's life, in the lives around me, am I maintaining control? If I am, then I consider Jesus my threat. And I'm going to withstand him. And I'm going to write him out of the script. But the ticket is to just let Jesus be Jesus. Just let Jesus be Jesus. Let him do what he wants to do. Recognize his work. Go with the flow, and hey, whatever is the result is going to be the result. Oh, what a life. Do not want to posture myself as his enemy. Let's look at the second relationship status people have with Jesus. And this is a better one. Friends. We want to be his friend. And we see some great ways of doing that here in chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. Friends, this is beautiful. Read this with me. Verse 1 says, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus therefore came to Bethany. Came out of hiding, comes to Bethany, where Lazarus was, the one he raised from the dead, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. So they gave a dinner for Jesus there. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those reclining with him at the table. Mary therefore took a pound of expensive ointment made from pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. So if the enemies of Christ in this passage are maintainers of status quo, the friends of Christ in this passage are expressors of thanksgiving. They're just so thankful. This is all in response for the great act that Jesus did by raising Lazarus out of the grave, and they are throwing him a resurrection party. Brought him back into Bethany. Oh man, can you just imagine these guys here? So Martha cooks the food, Lazarus spends time, and Mary gives gifts. This is their way of showing love. This is expressing their thankfulness for what Jesus has done. What has Jesus done in your life? Thank him for it. And then express it to him. Great way of making friends. Jesus. Look at Martha. Martha was kind of like my grandma. My grandma, man, she was just always on her feet, always in the kitchen producing food. I would go there 18 years old. I'd clip her trees for her. She lived by herself, and then she would always have a tray of like pistachio pudding. Did you ever have those little trays? Pistachio pudding. And man, I'd pull that tray up, man, I'd have myself some pudding. She would make these like turkey squares or sometimes chicken pot pie. I mean, this is just how she expressed her thanks. You know, she wasn't highly affectionate and hug and kiss, or she wasn't verbal, but she did cook food. This is Martha. She brings out the food, pulls out all the stops, cooks him a meal. And what we know of Martha, this is just the way she does life, right? Luke 10, we saw it a little bit last week. We see it again this week. This is what Martha does. She cooks him a meal, fresh baked bread. You got some herbs and lamb and broth. I mean, this is, the smell. Then Lazarus here, it's interesting. Again, we see the personalities. Okay, Martha's always on her feet, always serving, always doing, always cooking. Okay, Lazarus, he doesn't do much. Do you blame the guy? He was dead for 4 days. I know, he's taking a couple days off. I wouldn't blame the guy. He's been through a lot, right? He's in recovery mode. But he doesn't do a lot, but he just spends time with Jesus. Quality time. He's reclining at the table with his master, shoulder to shoulder, just exchanging pleasantries, resting, relaxing. When's the last time you've just gotten in the presence of Jesus and relaxed, reclined at the table? And then Mary. Mary always has a way of showing everybody up. Mary just does everything just a little bit more. I mean, Jesus doesn't condemn any of these styles of approaching him and expressing their thanksgiving, but Mary always just kind of has the corner on the market. She brings out her most precious possession. So it's a pound of precious ointment. This is like pure nard, spikenard, right? It was kind of in an alabaster jar. It was shipped in and imported in from the mountains of northern India. I mean, this was the finest stuff. Perhaps it was an heirloom. Perhaps it was an inheritance. But there's a little debate on who this Mary was in Scripture. And as I go through the data myself, I come to the conclusion that this is Mary Magdalene. This is Mary Magdalene. And if you know a little bit about Magdalene, sketchy. She had a past. She was prostitute. You know, she hired out and she made a lot of money. And if that's the case, if this is indeed who I think it is, Mary Magdalene, Jesus received the proceeds of her harlotry. She took her sinful life, poured it at the feet of Jesus, and he received it as worship. It's a phenomenal thought. So they all express their thanks to Jesus. It might be practical, like Martha's service. It might be relational, like Lazarus' time. Or it might be lavish, extravagant, like Mary's gift. This was all ways, legitimate ways of expressing thanksgiving for what Jesus has done. And really, that's the heart of worship. That's why we gather as a people, as the body of Christ, to say thank you, thank you, thank you. It's time to reflect. I hope before you come or while you're here, you're reflecting upon what God and Jesus has done in your life, the gracious acts that he just pours in. He is so good to us, so faithful to us. He is so steadfast. He does not quit. God is so loyal. And sometimes, man, it just comes out and we thank him. And it doesn't have to be musical. Sometimes you can go like Martha, you can serve. I serve the body of Christ. I serve the world because of the gratefulness and the thankfulness I have for Jesus. Sometimes it's relational. Just take some time, etch out some time in your calendar where you're just spending time with the Lord, expressing your gratefulness. Maybe it's giving gifts, offerings, being extravagant. I'm going to show you how grateful I am. This is to make yourself a friend of Jesus. What's your relationship like? If you see Jesus as your provider of needs, he will become your friend. He is my provider. He gives me what I need, and even oftentimes he gives me what I want. If you see him as your provider, he's my friend. The friends of Christ in this passage and in life are the expressors of thanksgiving. So let's look at the third relationship. The third relationship status here is traitors. It's kind of interesting. Enemies don't come far enough. Friends are right where they need to be, and then traitors take it too far. There were once friends that have now turned their back and gone in a direction that is hurtful to the relationship. So if the enemies of Christ in this passage are the maintainers of status quo, and then the friends in this passage are the expressors of thanksgiving, the traitors of Christ in this passage are the lovers of money. Look at John chapter 12, verse 4. So here's Mary. She's pouring out the ointment. She's wiping the hair, her hair, feet. There's a sense of intimate connection going on in the room. And verse 4 says, "But Judas Iscariot, one of the disciples, he who was about to betray him, said, 'Why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii, given to the poor?' He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. And having charge of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was in it. Jesus said, 'Leave her alone, so that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For the poor you always have with you, but you will not always have me.'" So imagine the room full of just good smell. Baked bread, herbs, lamb, maybe even the fatted calf. Who knows? There's broth. The smell of broth is so good. The smell of like sweet wine mixed with a fragrance of pure nard. Sweet, they say, sweet and earthy. Just the blend of all those fragrances, kind of a symphony of smell. Just, The atmosphere is one of pure devotion, intimate, close, enemies abroad, friends within. And yet here's Judas, who stands in the corner unaffected by it all. He's seen it all. He's heard it all. He's experienced it all. He saw the resurrection. There's Lazarus sitting right there. He saw the miracle. And yet he remains unaffected. Wow. How is that possible? Why was he unaffected? It's the love of money. Judas was a pretty sharp guy. It says he had control of the money bag. He was the accountant. He was a CEO. He was into the numbers. And when he saw the ointment being poured out on Jesus, he calculated he estimated the cost right away. He said, that's 300 denarii. We could have sold that. Now, 1 denarii is like a day's wages. So 300 denarii is like a year's salary. And today, in today's world, that would be maybe $60,000, right? So she takes $60,000. Who has that disposable, just on hand? Do you have a year's wages saved up? This woman did. And she took it, and she wasted it. I mean, she just poured it out on the feet of Jesus. $60,000. Bam. And Judas was like, that is a waste. You could have taken that money and you could have sold it for 60 grand and given it to the poor. But the text tells us his heart wasn't with the poor. It was, he wanted access to the money. Now, it's interesting that the text here says about Judas, he who was about to betray him. So he'd already worked out a deal with the Pharisees for 30 pieces of silver, and in today's money, that's $200. Can you believe that? He sold out Jesus for $200. He stabbed in the back. He betrayed Jesus for $200. And he's seeing 60 grand being poured out right in front of Jesus. And he saw dollar signs. That's just all he saw. He saw opportunity. I can get at that. And he was blind to everything else. So he was held by the pernicious grip of money. Now, money, the Bible says, the love of money is the root of all evil, right? Money is not evil; it's neutral. But your attitude towards it becomes very, very dangerous. It's the love of money, or sometimes I think it's the fear of not having it that held Judas so tightly. So your relationship status with money will no doubt affect your relationship status with Jesus. Where are you at? Are you in love with money so much so that you're tight? Or are you afraid of it so much so that you can't give it? It's interesting, if you look at these two relationships, Judas and Mary, they handle money so differently. Judas worships money, where Mary worships Jesus with her money. It's the attitude of the heart. I have this. And so I have this as a tool to express my thanksgiving. It's not a tool so that I can hold on to and put my trust in it. Money is the greatest indicator of where a person's heart is at. And if you don't worship Jesus with your money, then you probably worship money. If you don't worship Jesus with your money, then you probably worship money. The love of money is the root of all evil. The love of it. Or the fear of not having it. Let's finish up this passage here in verse 9 through 11. When the large crowd of the Jews learned that Jesus was there, they came not only on account of him, but, listen to this, also to see Lazarus, the man who's been raised from the dead. So the chief priests made plans to put Lazarus to death. Kill the miracle. Because on account of him, many of the Jews were going away believing in Jesus. 3 categories of people: enemies, friends, traitors. They all saw the miracle. They all experienced the goodness and the grace of Jesus Christ. And they all fell out into different categories. That's what Jesus does. If Jesus is a threat to your control, you will be his enemy. If Jesus is a waste of your money, you will be his traitor. And if Jesus is the source of your thanksgiving, he will be your friend. Expressors of thanksgiving. That's what I want to be. If you think about the concept of thanksgiving, it's really a response. It's not primary, it's always secondary. Thanksgiving, what are you thankful for? It's always based or predicated upon something that has already happened. Jesus has already happened. He's already happened in history. He's already happened in your life. He's preceded you. He always precedes you. He goes before you in the day. When you lie down at nighttime and go to sleep, do you know that he works the night shift for you? He goes before you. He does everything that you need him to do. He precedes you. And the ticket is to be a recognizer of what he's doing in your life and to be an expresser of thanksgiving. Watch for Jesus. Watch what he does in your life. And then turn it into praise. Turn it into thanksgiving. It's a secondary act. It's a gracious act that he does, and then it's a response to the grace of Jesus Christ. So as this gospel begins, I love it. The true light has come into the world. The true light has come into your world. And if the true light came into your world, you can say, man, he didn't have to do that. The true light went and paid a price for your salvation, took your place, paid your penalty. He didn't have to do that. The true light comes to live in your heart, fill you with the Spirit. He didn't have to do that. He answers our prayer. He walks and talks with us. He forgives our sin. He comforts our sorrow. He doesn't need to do any of this. But he does. He does. The gracious act of another. You didn't have to do that, but you did. If we can have Adrian come back up, we'll finish with one last song. One last song. This is not just a tack-on song. This is the best song in the morning. Because God speaks. It's all we do. We just read the Word, one passage at a time. We unpack it. We see what's there. He speaks, and by the power of his Holy Spirit, through the preached Word, he's speaking to you. Specifically, what is he saying? Anytime I talk to my kids, I train them. You need a response. Give me a response. That's what the conversation is all about. So this last song is looping that conversation around. He's spoken. What's your response? So as we sing this last song, I want you to go vertical with Jesus. I want you to think about what he's done in your life this last week, this last month, what he is trying to accomplish in your life. And based on his track record, he is good and he is faithful. How are you going to express your love? I want this to be expression of thanks. That's what friendship is all about. So let's stand for this last song. Let Jesus know how you really feel about his grace in your life.